What is home care? Home care is a care option that allows an older adult to live in his or her own home and be cared for by a professional. Home care services can often vary, depending on the older adult's health scenario. They can include things like personal care, bathing assistance, transportation, and specialized Alzheimer's care. Home care is also flexible in scheduling, ranging from a few hours per day to around-the-clock service. Most providers will create a unique care plan tailored to the needs of the individual. Then from there, a schedule is set for a professional caregiver to arrive at the appointed times and provide one-on-one care in the home. The three most common reasons for home care: 1. Life enhancement through social interaction and companionship. This includes such things like cooking meals, playing games, and transportation to appointments. 2. Acute care for chronic conditions such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. 3. Safety of having someone to provide personal care and administer medication, reducing the possibility of pandemic exposure. To find out more about home care, visit homeinstead.com.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome back. Man, we've really gone through some important stuff, and we really needed to spend a lot more time on each of those. And we're going to do that again in this session. We're going to get started, and we're going to find out there's just not enough time to cover everything because there's a lot of really bad people out there. Did I say that correctly, Detective?
I think so. I think that's the politically correct way to say that. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a reminder, this is our second annual No Place Like Home symposium, and the concept was to help people age in place, which is not as easy as it sounds. A lot of people, I'm just going to live in my house, and it isn't quite that easy. So today we're talking about how to prevent a few catastrophes and maybe prepare. And right now we're going to be talking with Detective Ashley Turner of the Major Crimes Division. Did I say that right?
You did.
With the Ada County Sheriff's Office.
Correct.
And you've been doing this for a few years.
I have. So I've actually been a sworn officer for over 9 in 3 different jurisdictions, 2 different states. And currently I happen to be a detective with the Major Crimes Division at Ada County Sheriff's Office.
Oh, very good.
Yes.
Oh, hang on. I was going to ask one thing, and then please finish that.
Sure.
Which was the most interesting jurisdiction to work in?
Oh, so probably my first. I came originally from Bakersfield, California. That's where my training began. So there's a lot of very exciting professional things that happen there as law enforcement. So, yeah.
Okay. So not that we're boring here. Okay.
No, it's actually much more peaceful, which is good. It's good for my sanity, if you will.
Yeah, well, I'll bet it is. So your educational is interesting, a master's degree in mental health counseling. That's interesting. And then you moved into law enforcement. I'm sure that's a great background for law enforcement, though.
It is. So originally I actually had started my master's degree program while I was living in Bakersfield, California. And I was actually doing a lot of my internship hours and things like that while as an officer. So I got a really interesting opportunity to be able to see things on both sides of the spectrum, both in uniform and then also as a civilian out of uniform, and working with a lot of domestic violence and sexual assault victims. And things like that. So it definitely has helped kind of shed some interesting perspectives for me throughout the years to kind of understand things from different viewpoints.
And now you've kind of settled into the older community, the seniors. Um, and I'm just reading this. Investigated many cases where the victim experienced fraud, extortion, online scams, dating scams. Now that one just, oh my gosh. As well as other types of manipulation style crimes. Man, my personal opinion is that there's a special place in hell for folks that take advantage of our older community. And I know that you probably can't offer up your opinion on that, but that's where mine is, because they're horrible people.
There are lots and lots of bad people in the world. I don't see a lot of the good ones, but sometimes there's definitely a lot of bad ones out there for sure.
All right, so and I know that this has got to break down a couple of different ways. There's the financial abuse, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure. But that isn't just this third party, somebody we don't know, never talked to. That can be family that can commit financial abuse. And then there's the physical abuse, which is often somebody close to them. Did I say that right?
Yes, correct.
So tell us about either or. Actually, talk to us a little bit about both. I mean, in general, you mentioned some of the things that you saw over here, the manipulation. I've talked to people that got the phone call about the grandson in Mexico and he needs some money so he can get back, and they gave him money, and at that point it's a little bit late. But what else? Talk to us a little bit about the financial.
So, I mean, first I want to say, I know I didn't address this earlier. I apologize for the background and things like that. I have some sick kiddos at home, so this is not quite the environment I was going to communicate with everybody in, but I apologize for that.
No.
So the way that we deal with things in Idaho, elder abuse is really challenging sometimes because it can kind of transcend both the criminal and the civil spectrum. And so what I mean by that is sometimes with the financial crimes, it can end up, even though there are people involved that are taking advantage of the older adult, or even taking money from them, it could end up being a civil situation as opposed to a criminal. And that's really difficult for people to sometimes understand. And so I'm kind of all about education. So hopefully I can kind of explain this. In Idaho, we have to go based off of what a quote vulnerable adult is. And so what that means, and whoever is interested in looking up, the legislative Idaho criminal code, it's 18-1505, just in case people are interested in kind of doing your own reading and research. But ultimately what that is any adult that's over the age of 18. So that could be anywhere from someone with developmental disabilities all the way to someone that's in their, older 80s, 90s, et cetera, who's essentially unable to protect themselves from abuse, neglect, exploitation, anything like that. In order for us to be able to prove that, generally it's, okay, they have dementia, or they have early onset Alzheimer's, or they have a caretaker that comes to their house and helps them with their physical needs. So we as law enforcement have to be able to articulate where that vulnerability comes into play so that we can get to the abuse part. I know that's a very vague explanation. So when we talk about the financial crime side, yes, you definitely get a lot of the telephonic scams. And generally, this is a really, unfortunately, great population to utilize that for bad guys because they're generally the ones that have landlines. So a lot of these scams are done through landlines, not so much cell phones. Even though, you and I and everybody kind of gets those scams on cell phones and things, landline's the best way.
Because some people will not pick up on that right away. Why is that? Why is it best on a landline?
So, number one, it's easier for the bad guys to get a list of phone numbers. So they can just essentially tap into whatever network they want, get a list of phone numbers, and then they do kind of what we call buckshotting. So they'll just call a bunch of numbers, because it is a very organized type of crime, and they always get at least a few. And it's not always, hey, my grandparents in jail. A lot of times it's, hey, you have a warrant out for your arrest.
Oh, that's another one. Yeah.
And if you don't pay this, then you're going to go to jail. And that's obviously for those of us that are a little bit more aware of the scams, know that that's a scam. But for someone who's older, has never been in trouble legally before, that's a terrifying concept. So they will absolutely abide by that. And the bad guys generally will actually stay on the phone with these people the whole time. And what I mean by that is they'll call the landline first, generally, kind of lure them in with fear, whatever that fear scam is. And then they'll get their personal cell phone. And then at that point, they kind of direct them, okay, I need you to go to, where's your closest Walmart?
Right. Yeah.
And then they'll direct them there, but they keep them on the phone, because the last thing they want is the cashier asking, well, why are you getting a iTunes gift card for $3,000? That doesn't make sense. So they give them a backstory. So there's a lot that goes into play with these online frauds, and I've seen more than once where folks have actually lost their entire life savings.
So
and
can I ask a question right there?
Absolutely.
That is really interesting. Is it, I can see the need to keep them on the line. Is that a fairly effective strategy for someone, is to just get off the phone?
Yes, but they won't stop calling is the challenge as well. So even if someone's like, I need to talk to my grandkid about this, or my kid about this, it seems kind of weird, and they hang up, the person will not stop calling. They will continue to call. So sometimes it might be helpful to have the younger generation step in at some point, answer the phone and say, hey, I'm contacting law enforcement. You better stop contacting them right now. And it's more of a fear tactic on our end, right? Because we're probably not going to find these people. They're all fake numbers. But at least they know, okay, this person is not alone, and they have a support system.
Right.
And like they don't really want to go down that road.
There was one other thought. Hang on just a second. So getting off the phone is perfect. And is the thing that causes the continuing phone call is that they picked it up in the first place? They picked up the call, and now they've talked to him, so they're now going to call again and again.
It's kind of like, it's exactly like fishing. So if you're a fisherman, I don't know if you are, you put the line in, you get that little nibble, but then the fish doesn't quite fully bite, but they know that it's there. So they keep calling and calling, hoping that the fish will bite all the way, just as long as the lie becomes better. So they kind of just expand on the lie as they get better, and they are generally very good at it.
And so caller ID would be very helpful.
Generally, yes.
Which is probably one of the reasons why the landline is so good, because there's not as many caller IDs on landlines.
Yep, that would be a good way. As well as, I know some people will have, their grandparents or whatever screen phone calls, and then it'll go to voicemail. And if it goes to voicemail, they don't generally leave a voicemail.
Yep. Well,
and then they just have to call back. So that's an option.
So that was the conversation I had many times with Mom was, Mom, that's why you have a cell phone. You can just let it screen, let it be your receptionist. You don't have to talk to them. Now, she didn't believe me because she's of a particular generation, and, she needs somebody to talk to, which, of course, is what they count on, right?
Absolutely.
They're not getting your generation, because you can absolutely ignore a phone call. Even if you know it's Mom that's calling you, you're going to ignore that. So don't talk to Mom, but ignore all the rest. That would be perfect. And so I can see that for the landline. So caller ID would be fine. And even if you don't have caller ID, just let the dang thing go to voicemail, right? Just don't even
Yeah,
worry about it. Let it, and then you can call them back.
right. And I'm generally a proponent nowadays of no landline, to be honest. Because generally the only people that are calling on a landline are people who are trying to scam you, or buy something from you or sell something to you. But the people who are close to you and in your support system and in your network, those people are going to call your cell
Yeah,
phone
that is
if you
true.
have one.
Absolutely true. So
So
we
I
still have,
generally try to do that.
yeah, and I can appreciate that. We still have a landline, and this week, every morning this week, a phone call at 8 and a phone call at 8:03. And they're Idaho numbers that we know don't really exist, but they're coming from North Idaho or some little town in Southeast Idaho. And they're not really there, right? They're not located in that. They just have that phone number. And my dear wife called back on one to opt out of a particular service, which I think is why we still keep getting those phone calls. But that would be best. Just kind of ignore them and then pick up the phone message. Got it.
I would.
Yeah. What else? What else do you see as far as a financial scam or financial abuse?
So outside of the spectrum of strangers, then you have the financial abuse within the family.
Yep.
And those are the hardest emotionally to deal with, because generally how that works from what I've seen is you'll have, for the ease of conversation here, I'll say grandma for the elder and then
Yep.
kids for the adult kids. So generally you'll have adult kids that don't really communicate very much with each other, aren't that close, have kind of separated throughout the years. And maybe one either takes care of grandma or lives with grandma.
Yeah.
And is siphoning money.
Yeah.
And so this ends up being one of those ones where it could be civil and it could be criminal. And so how this works is if grandma signs over when she's of good mind and healthy, if you will, and signs over the rights to, let's say, her bank account. So that person is her beneficiary, is the person who gets to make financial choices for her. Or she gives that adult child her credit card or her debit card to go get groceries for her. And they spend more, or they get extra gift cards for themselves or whatever. Now the other adult child will eventually step in and say, okay, I don't feel like you're taking care of our mom. And now where's all this money? Like how is she spending all of this money? So it becomes on that end kind of more of a civil thing,
Yes.
although we would document it criminally, and it just wouldn't go to the prosecutor's office just for paperwork wise. So they had it. And the reason that would be civil is because grandma voluntarily, even though she's kind of being scammed by one adult child, voluntarily gave over her credit card, her debit card, her financial information, and the person's taking advantage of her.
And so what that results in then is the rest of the family or someone else in the family bringing an action against that person.
Correct.
And alleging that they have not had permission to spend what they did spend. I mean, part of it, yes, but there's additional. And then in the civil courts, that can be rather long and drawn out, and you have to establish that thing called evidence, right? You've got to establish that evidence sort of a thing. And even if you get a judgment, so what? That money is gone, right? Especially if it's the daughter or the son or the granddaughter or grandson who's living with them, and that's all they got. That money is gone. All right. Well, that's horrible. Thank you for sharing that with us. But that happens a lot.
And it's because there's so many emotions involved. It's very difficult sometimes for people to understand Why isn't this criminal? They're obviously taking advantage, and 100% they are. I wish that if I could hold everybody who took advantage of those who cannot protect themselves accountable, there would be a lot more people in jail. I promise.
Yeah.
But in those circumstances, it becomes very difficult. So the parent or the other kids that want to get kind of involved would end up having to do some, again, on the civil side, bringing attorneys in and trying to establish, basically take that person off as the beneficiary and them gain the beneficiary responsibilities, which can sometimes be very tedious and challenging in general. So at that point, you kind of have to bring the masses of the family together and start kind of implementing your own stuff, or bring attorneys and things like that.
Yeah, it's we see this from where we see it. It is when that has happened, they have not had an attorney involved in the planning process from the beginning. It's almost always a do-it-yourselfer. And if, Mom, if you just put me on the account, then we don't have to go to court or anything like that. That, like I said, that means that there wasn't an attorney involved in the first place, because there's a whole raft of issues that you need to go through in order for Mom to make a good decision about that.
Yep.
Anyhow, I can go on about that. That's what we do, is trying to help Mom or Grandma take care of themselves so that they aren't being taken advantage of by, one of their kids or grandkids. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and that even comes to play when you talk about wills. A lot of times, if you have an adult child who moves in, let's say with grandma, under the ruse of, I'm gonna take care of you, but they're actually living rent free, all those things, they can even convince grandma to change the will, and it's not illegal if she's of soundness of mind. And then that starts getting into a lot of family rifts, right? And so that's where this more of the civil stuff comes into play, which generally I try to explain that. The criminal side would be if she was a already that established vulnerable adult. Yep. So she's already got dementia or early onset dementia, or something like that. And it has to be, at least she has to have been seen by a doctor, or at least somehow assessed by a professional. And then they're taking that money, taking that credit card, debit card. Then we have, now you're siphoning money from someone who can't make soundness of mind decisions.
Okay, so that's most of the financial. What else do you see from the financial side?
Honestly, those are probably the two big tiers, is the stranger and then the interfamilial.
All right, so now let's talk. We'll come back to this, but setting this up, let's talk about the physical abuse, which is in ways way worse than the financial abuse.
And that, yes, and physical abuse, again, with the soundness of mind thing, that always comes into play in this population. But physical abuse can transcend medical neglect. So let's say the parent needs some sort of medical attention or home hospice or home health care or something, and they're not getting it. Or the adult parent or the adult kid, claims, I'm their caretaker. I take care of them. But then they're living in, dirty diapers and aren't getting their food, and they're emaciated and anemic and, all of these things, not getting their baths. Those can all be basically accumulated together and eventually charged. So those things that maybe aren't leaving visible injuries, let's say, the best way to do that is if you have an outside adult child who comes in the house and they're like, something's weird, I don't know what's going on here, whether it's a caretaker or a family member, and documenting those and photographing them is important.
It's that weird thing called evidence again.
Correct. Yes.
Thing.
And it's not something that we tend to think about, right? You don't go to your mom's house and think, I'm going to photograph
Gotta
that
get
you're in
some
a dirty
pictures.
diaper.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a weird, uncomfortable thing because you don't want to photograph it, but you're not doing it for positive memories. You're doing it to say, okay, on this date at this time I showed up, and she hasn't bathed. I can tell by X, Y, and Z, and her toenails haven't been trimmed, or whatever the case is. That way, when you come and see us as law enforcement, it's not, well, there was this one time, oh, and then there was this other time, but you can't say when, can't say where. We don't have pictures. It makes it really difficult to gather all of that together, and then we're kind of behind the 8 ball trying to catch up at that point.
And so that's I don't even know what to call that, but that's a non-violent, I guess, abuse. But it could be she's not eating well, dehydration, a urinary tract infection because she's not drinking the way she's supposed to.
Yep.
And I don't know, there's dozens of other things that could be going on, but we'll call that the non-violent for a minute. And it's not good. Part of that, though, comes from total ignorance.
Sure.
And some of that is because they don't have a skill set. And I suppose that, and I'm not saying this to justify the child, but part of that is mom doesn't realize that they don't have the skill set to do this, and rather than get the skill set, they helping themselves to some food and free rent, and mom, you just take care of yourself. It's not good. But
well, and it's scary for people to think, oh, I don't want to go into an old folks home. I'm not that person. I would much rather be taken care of by family. And sometimes families like, okay, and they take that as a door opening to kind of an easy prey, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And then I hope it is not real common, but there's the violent physical abuse. There's hitting or striking or different things that way.
Sure.
I know it happens. Hopefully it isn't the most common one.
I would say probably not, but it's also probably the least reported.
Oh, is that right?
And that's because the elderly population tend to bruise very easily. So as we know, and so sometimes a light grab could manifest itself in very dark injuries and bruising. But that absolutely occurs, and that goes to domestic violence, whether the partner's in the home still and maybe they're both elderly, but they just don't have the capabilities of taking care of the one who's sick. And those are difficult to prove, especially if the victim has been in a domestic violence relationship for a very long time. I've seen that many times. And then you have, the caretaker who's doing, who might be overly aggressive. Maybe they're complaining about pain and they need pain meds, but the caretaker, is physically abusive. And generally, this is not all the time, but generally I don't see just from caretakers, just physical abuse. They don't just hit and strike the elderly person with nothing else going on. Generally, maybe they're siphoning their medications and selling them on the side. And so now the patient is in pain and sick or having symptoms that they can't alleviate themselves, but yet the meds are gone because the caretakers took them. And so they won't be quiet. So in order to keep the person quiet, they use physical violence. That's just one of many examples. And then, as much as people don't like to admit that this happens, there's also the sexual abuse side that happens. And I wish it didn't, but it does. And generally that's from outside the family that might happen. And then you have, just generally some striking and things like that. Those are sometimes very difficult to prove as well, especially if the victim is nonverbal.
Yeah.
And all you have are visible injuries, because of the way that the elderly population bruises generally. That's not all of them, but I mean, it's the circle of life. As we get older, we bruise easy. So it becomes very difficult. I've had many cases where I've seen some pretty bad injuries that I believe personally are something, but proving that is a completely different thing.
Yeah. Hey, just kind of curious now. What we're trying to do in our conference here is talk about people who would like to age in place or stay in their homes. And we're all for that. We'll help them to do that, but there are some standards we think ought to be met, and safety is huge on this. Let's see. I'm going to ask it, and then you can explain it. Isn't that great? I get to do that.
Get the easy part.
Yeah, I got the easy part. Does the physical violence, does that happen more at home than it does in, say, assisted living or memory care, or does it seem to matter one way or one place or the other?
So what I've seen it, at least in my career thus far, it's been at home.
At home.
And it's when the other family members are not there. So a family member will be working and they'll have a caretaker in the home. And when the adult parent or the adult kid comes to check every day on their mom or dad, trying to be the good child, and they notice new bruising and they're like, Mom, what happened? They may or may not be able to explain. And so this isn't like abuse where, the adult child's in the room and the caretaker is just punching their mom. That's not how this works. It's a very discreet, kind of a shut them up, for lack of better terms, way to do things. And it, because of the fear that's involved, because the caretaker is alone most of the day, with the older person, there's a lot of fear there because they know they can't take care of themselves and they have this pending violence over their head. But then if they tell their grandkid or their child or whoever comes and checks on them, the fear of retaliation is so much more frightening than just essentially taking it. So it becomes a very difficult thing.
So, I guess break this down a little bit. What do we look for? Right?
So, yeah.
If we're dealing with mom or dad or whatever, what from both the financial and then from the more physical, what are some things we should look for?
So I would say if we're going to hire a caretaker, let's go the caretaker route. You're going to get what you pay for, unfortunately, generally. So if you go with, I'm going to save money and go with the cheaper business that has home health people to come in my home, you're probably not going to have as high of a standard of employment than somewhere that you might be paying a little bit more. On top of that, I would absolutely require not only the employer to do background checks, but I would probably do my own research as well, being the adult child. So figure out where that person has lived, whether that's California or Idaho or whatever. And most criminal court cases are public record online now. And they should be able to go look up the person's first and last name, get their birthday. And if the company is like, we're not going to give that to you, then you know what? Okay. I have to make sure that my parent is safe. And I want to see what kind of criminal record this person has for myself so that I know that I'm not being, duped myself.
So what if somehow we got somebody that got past that? And like you said, you walk in and this isn't feeling right. There's something. What should we be looking for?
There's so many things, and I could go through all the behaviors that people would notice. But my main thing that I tell people is trust your gut and your intuition. If you walk in and you meet somebody who's supposed to be taking care of your family member, and your gut or your intuition says, "Oh, something's wrong here," even if you cannot articulate it, it doesn't matter. You have to go with your gut, because something instinctually within you is telling you something's weird here. I don't know what it is, but there's some alarm bells going off. Don't just let it go until things get bad. That would be my personal recommendation.
So what would you suggest at that point? I can see perhaps you don't have enough evidence to do something about it, but you could certainly terminate that relationship. You hire somebody, it's not forever.
Right. Yeah, you could terminate with that one. If you're going through a company, you could request a different person. And generally they'll ask, well, why? You know what, there's just a personality conflict. I think, maybe we need a different person in here. And you don't need to get into it. You don't need to get into, well, my gut says this person's a weirdo. Just say, it's just not going to work out. And, I'd appreciate a different person to be the caretaker. And so again, if the business is not amenable to that, then find a different business, because they're working for you.
Okay. So now it's a family caregiver. What should we be looking for? And this is more difficult because your gut it's not maybe as reliable, but yeah, I still got somebody in here and there's something going on. What should I be looking for? I mean, other than bruising. Right.
Are you talking about with the suspect, if you will, or the
yeah, so I come in and I've got a sibling or a grandchild that's providing the care, the caregiving. And again, I'm just not, there's something here that's going on. What should I look for? What should I look at?
So usually, if the person is bedridden or just in general, ask questions. If they can communicate on any level, the person who's receiving care, communicate with them one-on-one outside of the scope and the hearing of the other person who's been giving them care. That way, if there is some fear there, that's gone. So you can send that person on an errand. You can send them to the grocery store so that you can have a one-on-one talk. Bruising is obviously always, important to see. And if the story from the caretaker is not aligning with a rational reason as to why that injury is there, then you need to really start questioning that. It's kind of like if you have children and your child gets a bruise on their forehead and you're like, well, what happened? Oh, well, they, little Johnny fell and hit his head on the coffee table when they're trying to walk. Oh, okay. It's not a hesitation. You know how to explain it. You know what's going on. So if there's a hesitation there, for example, one injury I saw, the woman had very thin skin at that point in her life. She was on home hospice. And it was a domestic violence type situation. And a lot of her skin on her forearm had been peeled off. Because of a physical assault that happened. And the reason was, well, she has a medical bracelet on her wrist and that must have done it. No, that doesn't happen. That's weird. Those are very loose unless you're digging. That doesn't make sense. Could it? Sure. Is it probable? No. So when you're hearing the story, ask the caretaker questions too, away from the person getting cares things. So if you're seeing things that are weird, or even if your spidey senses are up and you just are like, oh, okay, what'd you guys do today? And just start with those general questions. And if they're like, oh, nothing, you just stared at the wall all day. Ask questions. That's your right and responsibility. And if they can't tell you, and it seems like they're hiding something, then ask more questions.
Yeah, this is not fun stuff, is it?
No, and hopefully I'm answering your question. I tend to talk a lot, so I'm hoping I'm.
No, you're exactly right on for what I'm asking, because, again, we will support clients in their desire to stay at home. But one of the standards that they have to meet is being safe. And right. So this is huge stuff. We haven't seen a ton of it, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. It just means we need to be very, very vigilant about what we're seeing. Okay, so let's shift back to the financial side. Any thoughts? What can we be looking for or asking about? What are, some of the suspicious activities? What do you got?
So in the cases that I've seen, even when I come into play, and as soon as I come into the picture, a lot of times the adult kids may not know what's going on yet. And so I tend to make it very common practice for me to call them after I'm done with the victim and let them know, hey, didn't know if you knew this, but now your father is completely out of his life savings because of this situation. And they're always shocked, right? Because they don't want to share, and it's embarrassing, and they feel shame. And at some point they realize, wow, I messed up, and I have never done anything like this before. And I'm like, they feel very stupid, and they're not. It's just, this is these people's job. Their job is to take advantage. So I'm always a proponent that at some point, if someone wants to live on their own and they're older, to maybe allow one of their adult responsible kids, if this is even possible, or even like a financial attorney or something just on the back end, just to keep an eye on stuff. Not to necessarily go spend money for them or make financial decisions for them at that point, but just to keep an eye so they have access to the bank accounts. Because if you see even one charge for $2,500 for an iTunes gift card, that should be an immediate, okay, we need to shut things down. We're going over to their house right now, and we're going to have a conversation as to what's going on. Because you're not going to, the story is, oh, I'm buying this for my grandkids. No, you're not. You're sending this to Guam or who knows. So I think having that just visual ability and just the access is really important, not necessarily to make decisions, but just to monitor so that okay, what's she or he spending money on? What are we doing here? I think that's helpful if it's possible.
It would seem to me that the ability to review the books, the accounts, even once a month would help mom or dad to remember that somebody's going to be paying attention and they're going to ask questions. And
absolutely,
they don't want to go there because they're mature. They can do this, and they don't want to be embarrassed. And yeah.
And it's going to be up to that adult child or grandchild to have that conversation, which can be very difficult because the person that's kind of relinquishing a little bit of that control and power is hard. It just is. And so you need to be empathetic to the fact that this is a huge thing for someone to give away that independence. It's a big thing. And so just explaining, hey, you know what? There's a lot of bad people in the world, and there's a lot of scams that maybe you and maybe I am not even aware of. I just want to look. I'm not going to use your money. I'm not going to spend it. I just want to make sure that everything is okay and no bad people are taking advantage of you, because if so, I'm going to need to step in.
Yeah. So that's kind of a third party. That's a stranger that's maybe taking advantage. What if it's one of the kids?
That one's harder because it kind of depends on how. Usually if there's one in the home, the other kids maybe aren't as physically involved, so they won't know until it's way too late, until things are getting to the point where, okay, now we're looking at home health care, and now we're looking at medical expenses or whatever, and where's all the money, kind of a thing. So that one becomes a lot more difficult. And I think I don't even have a solid solution for that, because usually there's so many rifts within the family that you have to transcend to even get past that. from what I've seen, not always, but generally the adult child living in the home who is siphoning money and taking advantage is kind of generally the problem child, and always has been within the family. But it's also generally the kid that the parent has protected their whole life.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of this going on for their whole lives. So the other kids are like, mom or dad, what are you doing? This kid's always been a problem. You know, they had drug issues or whatever. And you're going to let them live in your house? Are you kidding me? And you're going to let them be the beneficiary? So that one becomes very difficult unless the responsible one can get in before the irresponsible one.
So there's a number of things that we can do from an estate planning standpoint up front that can minimize that. We can make sure that it's not just one child, that maybe there's two that work together and they have to report to each other. And that doesn't completely get rid of the risk, but it minimizes it quite a bit. And then if we have a power of attorney, we can take the stress from mom or dad and say, no, that isn't going to happen. You can't live here. So there are some things you can do and set up beforehand, but you can't. It's a conversation we've had almost all day long, and that is, you can't force it on mom and dad. You have to get them to agree and say, yes, I want to take care of this. And it's really easy for them to say that. It is also extremely difficult for them to actually do it. And I've seen that up front a number of times. Well, listen, I really, really, really appreciate your time this afternoon. And again, we didn't have enough time, but that was about all I could handle, talking about these kinds of people that they're not good people. Again, there's, a particular place in hell for them. And maybe we'll go visit and be kind then, but we shouldn't be kind now. We need to protect our parents and our loved ones. So thank you. Is there any one thing you want to throw out there as we head out?
No, I know that it's case by case basis. And I know there are probably many people that are watching or listening or whatever that have questions or personal situations where they want to run by it. Please realize that you can always just call the police department, or you can find me. I'm a detective in Star. I'm the only one. I'm not hard to find. And just ask. And any deputy in Ada County or law enforcement should be able to just say, you know what, I needed an officer to call me back. I just want to run this by them because I think it's a little strange.
Yeah.
That's also part of law enforcement's job, is we don't just put people in jail, but we also like to support and educate and help, because there are lots of things in life that normal people don't deal with that are normal for us, unfortunately, that we do deal with.
Yeah.
So if you have questions or you have that weird sense, just call and run it by somebody. If you don't have a good experience, or for some reason that person's not answering your questions, call somebody else. Find me and call me. I'm fine with that. If I can help kind of steer you in the right direction, great. Or they can utilize you, Mark. Anything like that, just reach out to the resources and ask questions. Don't just go with it.
Yep. Thank you. That is perfect. Thank you for your time this afternoon, Detective Ashley, and good luck. Keep finding those bad people.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You take care.
Thank you. You too.